All right, we're talking about Saul in the United Kingdom, and as Jim was praying there, all these things fit together to bring us to Christ, and that's what we need to keep in mind, what's going on with this nation of Israel and them having a king, and then, of course, David, Solomon, and so on. That all through this, God is working out His plan of salvation because He had chosen to bring the seed that would bless all families of the earth through the lineage of Abraham, and then, of course, Isaac, Jacob, and we'll see through David as well. But He's working all of that out, and He's able to work that out in spite of men and either their failings, their weaknesses, shortcomings, and in spite of men who deliberately rebelled against God's will, stood opposed to it, tried to thwart it in one way or another. And so that gives us great confidence in God. We can trust in Him. Despite the failings of men, despite the chaos in the world, we know that He's working for the redemption of our souls. And as we align with Him, He will bring that about. But we've noticed some things about Saul, of course, being a humble man at the very beginning of his reign, and how he was committed to doing the will of God, at least at one point in the account that unfolds. Remember that he really came to the fore when he rescued the men of Jabesh Gilead. He showed great bravery in his leadership, great concern and love for his fellow Israelites, and then also great humility and generosity in not punishing those who had opposed him being king, because there were those around him who wanted to do that, of course. Well, that brings us to 1 Samuel 13 and 14. We looked at 13 last week and how that he lost confidence, and the men who were with him were running away from him, so he ended up offering a sacrifice against the will of God. Samuel rebuked him for that. In chapter 14, it gets down to the end there, verses 47 and 48. And what we want to notice here is while he had that issue with the Philistines and he was nervous about them, he still was out there fighting for Israel to try to make that kingdom strong. So let's look at 1 Samuel 14, 47, and 48. Who's got that? Go ahead, Ron.
So Saul established his sovereignty over Israel and fought against all of his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the people of Ammon, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he harassed them. And he gathered an army and attacked the Amalekites and delivered Israel from the hands of those who plundered them.
Yeah, so as you look on these maps here, you can see these nations that he names in this particular passage. They're all around them. Ammon, Moab, Edom's further to the south there, the Amalekites, Philistines, and Philistia there. So it's giving this picture all around them. Israel was surrounded by enemies, and he's fighting them to try to ensure some measure of sovereignty in that territory. Now, Saul, of course, as we're going to see, he's the king in the United Kingdom that had the least amount of territory that they controlled. David expands it further, and then as the fruits of David's labors and everything, and then when Solomon comes to the throne, they have their greatest sphere of influence or sphere of control, if you will. But 1 Samuel chapter 15, we get to this rebellion of Saul, where it's not out of fear as chapter 13 was, but in chapter 15, it's really out of arrogance in thinking that he knows better than God, that he can determine what's going to please God and honor God. And of course, he completely rebels against God in doing this. So 1 Samuel chapter 15, what was the command that was given?
He was commanded to wait 7 days, and then he would come and offer burnt sacrifices and peace sacrifices.
Chapter 15. Chapter 15. Who's at issue there? The Lord brings up this group in verse 2, which chapter 14 really gave us a preview of it. Mike?
He was to go in and utterly destroy the Amalekites.
Okay, why were they to destroy the Amalekites? What was the issue here?
He says because of what they did to Israel, whenever they stopped them, I don't know if they were called out.
Yeah, they attacked the Israelites coming out of Egypt. Remember, if memory serves me, they attacked them in the rear, and this is where Joshua helped to lead them. But God had a long memory here, and now he's exacting vengeance on these people. And understand, this isn't in a vacuum. It's not as though these people otherwise were decent and good and, they believed in Jehovah and they just made a stupid mistake along the way. These are pagans. And it was time for them to be punished. And so God says, okay, Saul, you're the one that needs to go do this. Get your people together, go down there and attack them. And it says in verse 7, and Saul attacked the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is east of Egypt. And I don't have it on this map here, but Havilah is a little further south. If you go south of the Dead Sea, it's south of there. Shur, the wilderness of Shur, goes west over toward Egypt. So this area that you see on the map in the bottom left, the Amalekites, that's why they're in there. It's from Havilah to Shur. That's where they were settled. That's where he needed to go and attack them to clean them out. Now, verse 12, 1 Samuel 15, verse 12. Who's got this for us? Go ahead, Hank.
So when Saul rose early in the morning, when Samuel rose early in the morning and met Saul, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul went to Carmel, and indeed he set up these monuments for himself. And he had come around past Bethel and gone down to Gilgal.
Okay. So when we hear Carmel, I normally think Mount Carmel. But that's not what this is. This is actually the town or the village of Carmel. You can see that bottom arrow there, west of the Dead Sea. That's Carmel. So he was down south, attacked the Amalekites. He's on his way back, going north. He stops at Carmel, and what did he do at Carmel? Verse 12 says. Set up a monument to himself. If that doesn't tell you about Saul at this point in his life and what he thought about himself, he's given himself the glory. And so it shows there's been this big shift between when he was anointed and he was hiding and this point in his life. And it's foretelling of what, of course, is going to happen and take deep root in him when it comes to David. But here he is. So he stops at Carmel. He makes that monument for himself. He's going back to Gilgal, which is at the north tip of the Dead Sea there. So traveling back. And it says in verses 32 and 33 that this is where Samuel dispatched Agag. So 1 Samuel 15, 32 and 33. Who's got that? Go ahead, Jim.
Then Samuel said, bring Agag, king of the Amalekites, here to me. So Agag came to him cautiously, and Agag said, surely the bitterness of death is past. But Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag in pieces before the Lord in Gilgal.
Okay, so Saul had taken all this booty and everything back up to Gilgal. He had reached that point, and Agag's there. Samuel then has to take care of business and get rid of Agag. And that all happened there at Gilgal. Now, the next thing that we see, chapter 16, is the focus begins to shift over to David. We're introduced to him here. And, of course, he's of Bethlehem, a Bethlehemite. His father was. That's where he was born. That's where, of course, the Lord's going to be born. But Bethlehem, there just south of Jerusalem, is where Samuel goes to anoint David as the next king over Israel, because God had rejected Saul at this point, and it was a foregone conclusion his dynasty was coming to an end. Now then, chapter 17, I just want to jump forward to this. Chapter 17, you have this battle with the Philistines. This is where David really gets his national prominence. Let's notice chapter 17, verse 1 and 2 there. Who will get 17, 1 and 2? Go ahead, Philip.
Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Socoh and Azekah, and Ephes Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines.
Okay, so they're going to go from Gilgal over to, you can see the Azekah and the Socoh there. You see that little river, Elah? Well, the river is going to be in what area? It gives it a different description here in verse 2. It's just a minor point, but valley. Rivers are in valleys, right? They're not on peaks. That's the point. Anyway, so it's a valley in there. That's this river of Elah, valley of Elah. So this is where the battle with the Philistines, with Goliath, is going to take place. What had happened is that the Philistines were moving up from their normal territory, and they're pushing over into the northern part, or further north and east. They're pushing in there, and so this is time for them to go to battle over here. Now, they're having this confrontation. Verse 4 tells us that Goliath is from where? Gath. And I didn't mark it on this, but you can see the Azekah. If you go west, southwest of there, you have Gath, solidly in the Philistine area. So there's Goliath of Gath, and they've all gathered up there. And of course, they have the fight and the battle, and David wins that battle against this great giant, and the people begin to praise him. Now, what happens after that? Now, I know we're skipping along, but I want to hop, skip, and jump to some of these locations. What happens beginning in chapter 18? 1 Samuel 18.
You mentioned about the praise going to David. Well, there was resentment on Saul's part, and so an evil spirit begins to be manifested in Saul towards David and the good that he's accomplishing through God's power. And as you mentioned previously, he began to alienate himself from God, and it's becoming more and more manifested as we go through this.
Right, exactly right. So there's this, I don't know if you would say struggle, there's this battle, there's this conflict that begins here in chapter 18, and it really grows throughout the rest of 1 Samuel between Saul and David, and it's all one-sided. David does absolutely nothing to provoke Saul in any way. He's simply doing what is right, and Saul hates him for it because he recognizes, one, he knows he's already been told God has sought for a man after his own heart. The kingdom is being taken away from you. So he knows for a fact that's going to happen. Now, he has not been told specifically who it is, but as you read through the account, Saul ends up telling Jonathan, don't you understand that David's the one that's going to take the throne, and it's going to prevent you from being king. And so he's trying to turn his son against him as his son defends David. But the point is, Saul recognizes his power slipping away, and he's doing everything he can to try to establish a dynasty. David is doing nothing but showing respect and deference to Saul through the entire thing. It's perhaps one of the most one-sided rivalries or competitions ever, among men. David, Mike.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would say that the reason that it talks about how this spirit of resentment came through Saul was because of the knowledge he knew that it was being taken away from him. That's all God did. He didn't place a possession upon him or anything like that. He just told him knowledge it's being taken away from you, and then he started to recognize all these different things. So sometimes knowledge, when we have that knowledge, we have to know what to do with it and put it in its proper place. He didn't put it in its proper place.
Right. He wasn't content to say, okay, I have sinned, I've rebelled, I understand, I'm willing to accept the punishment from the Lord. I'll live out my days and let God work things out. He wasn't content with that. So that's a good point there. So David comes to prominence. You begin chapter 18 seeing this resentment. Chapters 19 down through 27, you see where he's chasing and pursuing David from one place to another. So chapter 19, verse 18. 19, verse 18. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Caesar.
So David fled and escaped and went to Samuel at Ramah, and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and stayed in Naioth. Okay.
All right, so you have at Ramah, that's the northernmost one that I have the outline around. So from Gibeah up to Ramah. Gibeah was essentially Saul's capital. David's having to flee, to run away because Saul is trying to kill him. Remember, there are occasions where he threw the spear, tried to spear him to the wall. But he escapes up north to Samuel, to Ramah. And then he comes down south to that place called Nob, not too far away. And so he's running away from him. Chapter 21, verse 1. Chapter 21, verse 1 says, David came to Nob, to Ahimelech, the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid when he met David and said to him, why are you alone? And no one is with you. And you probably have a little header there. What is it that happens at Nob?
That's where David ate the consecrated bread.
And what else happened?
He lied.
Yes, he did. What else happened? He got something there. What did he pick up at Nob? Yeah, the sword of Goliath. So he picked that up there. He continues on his way with his men. Of course, later Saul has the priest slaughtered there because they aided David in this, though they had no knowledge that it was something that was against the king. But anyways, so Ramah down to Nob. And then chapter 21, verse 10. 21, verse 10. Josh, you want to get that for us?
And David arose and fled that day from before Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath.
Anything odd about that? Do you think people in Gath knew what happened with David and Goliath? Yeah, I would say that story got out really quick. And of course, to his hometown where he was from, this giant, this great warrior, had been slain by this teenager in Israel. And now David's on the run, however much later this is. He shows up. They know who he is, but he's finding refuge there. That's just so very interesting. One of the things you see in God's providence, I suppose, is he's running from his real threat. I mean, the enemy you would think is in Gath, but actually the enemy is in Gibeah, Saul, chasing him from place to place. But anyways, so he goes and he finds refuge there at Gath. Of course, David has to keep moving. And chapter 22, verse 1. 1 Samuel 22, verse 1. Who's got that? Go ahead, Philip.
David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. Okay.
This cave of Adullam or Adullam, you can see that it's just east of Gath there, sort of at the head of the river Elah there. The cave of Adullam, very famous. This is a modern picture of it. I don't know if you can see it, but the little blue dot on the right side of the screen, that's Jerusalem. And this is kind of taken from a position looking northeast. But that cave of Adullam is the little dot sort of to the left. Can you all see that, by the way? Okay. All right, so it's in that area. Don't know exactly where it is, but it's in that area. One of the hard things about shots like this is you can't tell how hilly it is, but it is hilly all through there. But that's the cave of Adullam there, where he hides out. And does anybody know anything particular that's interesting about that cave, about this spot? David wrote Psalms here. So Psalm 57 and Psalm 142 were written about or while he was there at the cave of Adullam and hiding from Saul. So some of the Psalms that you read will have a reference back to this or back to other places where David was or events happening. And it's very interesting to go and to read those and because you're getting into the mindset of David in his fears or his trust in God, his weariness of being chased by his enemies. But that's laid out there for us to see this. And one of the great beauties of it is, for me at least, is we look at David as this great hero of faith, as a man who's like granite, he's a guy who faced the giant. He's the greatest king Israel ever had. But when you read about his Psalms and his emotions, he was not just a warrior, but he was a man who had feet of clay, who had concerns and fears and desires and hopes and all these things that he went through, and he cried and pouring his heart out to God. So it helps us to appreciate the trials we go through. Having emotions about those things is not wrong in and of itself. We just need to turn our hearts to God to find strength in Him to get through those difficult times. Any other thoughts there, Mike?
I thought it was interesting as you kind of read through where he commands his warriors to go and attack the priest. You have some who say, I'm not going to do it. And then you have one who says, yes, I will. But it also says that he went into where the priest actually were. He killed the men, the women, the infant, the donkeys, the ox, killed them all. It's like if he would have just done that at the very beginning, he wouldn't even be in this situation. But that was where he was in life.
Yeah, and that was Doeg the Edomite who was willing to step up and do that. Exactly right. Any other thoughts there? All right, so he escapes to the cave of Adullam, and then he hears about the fact that he takes his parents. Remember, it says his parents had come to meet him. I believe it was at Gath or at the cave of Adullam. But then he takes them over to Moab to get them out of harm's way, because he's in fear of the fact that his parents would be attacked by Saul or maybe taken captive and used as leverage against him. So he takes them over to Moab. He puts them in safety over there. And then he hears about this Keilah, that's how I'm going to say it. 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 1. 1 Samuel 23, verse 1, where the Philistines are fighting against them. And David goes down with his men, that group of men that's now with him, and he goes down and rescues them and fights the Philistines off. But he can't stay there because he's in danger, so he flees to Ziph, which is south of there. So you see the Dead Sea, you see En-Gedi by the Dead Sea. Just west of that is that Ziph. So he's fled to Ziph for refuge at that point. And if you'll just keep your place there, 1 Samuel chapter 23, let's go to Psalm 63. Psalm 63. And read the little header, explanation header, and then verses 1 and 2. Who will get that for us? And I hope you know what I mean by the explanation header. So, Ron.
A psalm of David when he was in the wilderness of Judah. O God, you are my God. Early will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you in dry and thirsty land where there is no water. So I have looked for you in the sanctuary to see your power and your glory.
Okay. So that wilderness of Judah, you just see Ziph there, and that's because it's in the territory of Judah. And when it says wilderness, of course, in our mind, so notice where Adullam is on this map. Notice where Ziph is, kind of southeast from there. And then Adullam here, and it gets drier to the southeast. So he's there, the dry and thirsty land. So he's out there in what's called the wilderness. We would probably describe it as a desert. But he's out there and trusting in God. Any other thoughts there?
Steve, I have a question. What's the approximate distance between these locations that you mentioned, like Adullam and Jerusalem and some of this? And I know you said very mountainous or hilly.
Yeah. I wish I could tell you off the top of my head. I'm seeing if there's I can't quite read that scale there.
I'd say probably about 50 miles or so.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not as far as we might think because it's a compressed area. But let's put it this way. When you're going on foot through the mountains, through the wilderness, this is a hike and a half for him and his men. But go ahead.
As you're pointing out, even in these short distances, the terrain and the topography changes very rapidly.
Yes, absolutely it does. And so this, to your point, Ron, as he's fleeing, as he's getting away, it's not as though he's traveling a Roman highway. He's traveling through the wilderness. Now, there would be some places where no doubt there is a common path, but I'm guessing he's very leery of the most common paths because they're going to run into people. They may run into Saul's people. But he's, as it describes it, he's in the wilderness. He's in a cave. At one point, remember that Saul's people are on one side of the mountain and David is hiding on the other side of the mountain. And in fact, he's hiding at one point where Saul comes into the very cave where he and his men are hiding. So this is remote wilderness out here. Mike?
Yeah, it mentions here in 1 Samuel 23 about 600 men with David.
Yeah.
You've got a large company of men moving through.
Yeah, food and water, you got to provide for them. Now, it's men, and they don't have a baggage train. They're moving light and fast relative to what you would move a group of people. They're moving much faster than Israel would have as a people, as a nation, or the tribes when they went into their territories. But still, you've got to move all those people. That is a huge logistical challenge. Now, 1 Samuel 24, verse 1. 1 Samuel 24, 1. Who's got that for us? 24:1. Go ahead, John.
When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi."
Okay, the wilderness of En-Gedi. So it's on the west side, about midway up the Dead Sea there. That's En-Gedi. Here's En-Gedi. from the east looking to the west. So I don't know if you can see at the very bottom left, there's a little piece of the Dead Sea that's showing right there. So this is the area of En-Gedi. This is from an opposite perspective, looking out toward the Dead Sea to the south there. This is the general region. So if you look up in those hills, that's kind of what it looks like. You can see here there's a spring coming down in one place, and my guess is that David and his men found at least to camp out near the spring. But I think this picture is showing there's caves. You can kind of see the caves in there, and they could get back in these areas. But there's also various areas where they could get fresh water and take care of themselves as far as those kinds of needs. So he's hiding out here at En-Gedi for a time. Again, there are various places where that's mentioned, I believe, in the Psalms. And so you see all this running away from Saul, hiding. You can imagine the kind of stress, the kind of pressure that would put upon a person to constantly be moving around under threat of death. His men, at times literally just on the other side of the hill from where you are. And how that he built a great trust in God during this time as God looked after him, would not allow Saul to take him and to make him captive. And how frustrating it would be that you show this man respect and you spare his life and he just won't quit. Just will not stop pursuing you. And all through this, let's understand, Saul is directly rebelling against God's will. Because God has told him, your son's not going to sit on the throne. And he is doing everything in his power to try to overthrow that. And it's utterly futile. What kind of man would you describe Saul during this time? Vindictive? Anything else? Unhinged?
Hard-headed. He had more than a decade to repent. And it's not like God said, hey, your sons are not going to sit in the film in day 2.5 minutes. I mean, this was decades, a decade and a half, 15 years or so. So he had time.
Yeah. God didn't remove Saul from the throne. He said, your son's not going to sit on that throne. So I'm taking the kingdom away from you in the sense I'm taking away from your dynasty, your legacy. So yeah, he had plenty of time. Any other way you would describe him, Ron?
Well, this envy has led to a man that is full of hatred, and he's malice, malicious, and he is bitter, and as we talked about, all of resentful. So he is not having desirable characteristics at all.
He's not. He's not enjoying life at all. He's miserable. And a great lesson here is when we go against God's will, we're going to be miserable. There's just no two ways about it. Mike.
It's funny, he's putting so much energy and time and effort into this, much more than what he did as a kid, whenever he was a good kid. And he was scared at times, he wouldn't obey, things like that.
He was quite zealous at this point, wasn't he?
Yes.
Quite zealous. Carrie.
He was blinded by his anger. But it's interesting that Jonathan had accepted what God had said about him not becoming the next king. Jonathan accepted that, but of course Saul would not give up.
Yeah, Jonathan is one of those underrated heroes in the Old Testament. He is absolutely a great man, and you can see why David loved him so much, because he was a good and decent man.
You look at Saul as a person, he made a monument to himself. So his ego was above anything else. And then God telling him that his son's not going to sit on the throne. In the military, you probably see guys lose power for whatever reason. And someone of lower status takes their control and gets control while they're setting off to the right. they're mad. They're mad because their ego has just been shot down.
Right, yeah. He's definitely hurt here. Jim?
He's guided by his emotions and not by what his reason or by faith. And causing him to slip away from God farther and farther. And the other side of this is he's driving a wedge in the nation between the people that are so-called loyal to him and the rest of the nation.
Right. And that's a really good point, because it constantly tells you about how David behaved himself well. The people loved him because of this, and he was out there fighting against the Philistines and delivering the people. So the people recognized David's goodness, his good character, and they were drawn to him. But then when you have the king who, as a nationalist, as a patriot, you would want to support, and he's going against the number one patriot in the country, it brings that division. Certainly does. So he goes from En-Gedi, and he ends up at Gath again in 1 Samuel 27. In 1 Samuel 27, verse 6, it says that he is given the city of Ziklag. So 1 Samuel 27, verse 6, he's given Ziklag as a prize, a reward for him down sort of in the area of the Philistines, but that's still in the territory of Judah. But that's kind of where we wrap up with him running from Saul and all those types of things unfolding. The next thing we get to is Saul and his demise. So let's jump forward to 1 Samuel 28 and notice verse 4. 1 Samuel 28, verse 4. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, John.
The Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem, and Saul gathered all Israel, and they camped at Gilboa.
Okay, so Gilboa, you can see labeled on this, kind of in the middle there, Mount Gilboa. It's the end of that river, and my vision's failing me. I'll probably see it better up here at Kishon. All right, so Mount Gilboa, the area of Gilboa is around that area, and we're going to see these things unfold. Chapter 28, verse 7. The Lord has left Saul. He won't talk to him. And so 1 Samuel 28, verse 7. Let's read that and see what he does here. Go ahead, Tom.
Then Saul said to his servants, "Seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servants said to him, "Behold, there is a medium at Endor."
Okay, this medium at Endor. So you can see it's the top arrow there. It's that little area, Endor. So he goes up there, and does anybody remember what happens on this occasion when he goes to see the witch at Endor? What does he ask for? It describes, in New King James, it says medium here. Philip?
He asked for her to call up Samuel from the dead so he could speak to Samuel.
Okay. And was it successful? Did she have the power to call up the dead?
No, she was shocked. She was shocked at that.
Yeah. When Samuel actually pops up, she's wigged out because it just doesn't happen. Right? If it happened regularly, she wouldn't be bothered. She'd be like, okay, here he is. But she's freaked out. Here's somebody from the dead. And she can see him, but evidently Saul can't because he asked, what does he look like? You know, and he sends that message, tomorrow you and your sons are going to be with me. And basically that is, you're going to be dead tomorrow. Mike.
God's not in your life. You can turn to other things to try to find some kind of peace of mind.
Yep, exactly right. And so that which he had actually banished and outlawed in the land, he ends up turning to. That which he knew to be wrong, he ends up turning to because he's so desperate at this point, shutting himself off from God, and God saying, I'm done with you. All right, so chapter 31, 1 Samuel chapter 31, this is kind of getting down to the crux of the matter. And let's read 1 through 10. Let's get this account, 1 through 10. Who's got that? Mike, go ahead.
The Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from the Philistines, but fell fatally wounded at Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines also overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle went heavily against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was gravely wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to the armor bearer, Draw your sword and pierce me through with it. Otherwise, these uncircumcised Philistines will come and pierce me through and abuse me. But the armor bearer was unwilling, because he was very fearful. So Saul took his sword and fell on him. When the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul died with his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men on that day together. Now when the people of Israel who were on the other side of the valley, with those who were beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the cities and fled. Then the Philistines came and settled in them. It came about on the next day, when the Philistines came to strip those killed, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen at Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head and stripped off his weapons, and sent him through the land of the Philistines to bring the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put his weapons in the temple of Ashtoreth, and they nailed his body to the wall of Bethshan.
Okay. All right, so this is that valley of Jezreel. You can see there Mount Gilboa, in that little blue marker there. Just to the north of that, where you see those modern farm fields, that's the valley of Jezreel. That's where this battle is taking place, in that area. This is Mount Gilboa, so looking back from it, and you can see the particular one. I guess it's Gilboa, but I think it's kind of a couple of peaks more designated as Mount Gilboa. But this is where it took place, and not far from there is this place called Beth-shan or Beth-shan. This is Roman ruins that you're looking at, but that hill up there, the archaeologists believe, and you can see, let me get a little bit closer look. You can go up there, and this is the ruins of where that wall was that they pinned his body to that wall. The account tells us they separated his head from his body. They sent his armor and his head one direction. They took his body and pinned it up here on this wall to show everyone what they had done, of course. But this is the place that all of that took place. So you can see Beth-shan there, just east of Jezreel, east of Mount Gilboa. And then in chapter 31, verses 11 through 13, let's read this about the men of Jabesh Gilead. Who's got this for us? Philip?
Now when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and traveled all night, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan. And they came to Jabesh and burned them there. Then they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and fasted 7 days.
Okay. Now, why would these men do that? Mike?
Humiliating to the family. That was the ruling class of Israel.
Yeah, very humiliating.
I was going to say, Stephen, you're still originally God's anointed. And so they are, in my thought, recognizing that appointment. That he was king.
Yeah, they're definitely showing honor to him as king of the land and sparing the humiliation.
At the end of the day, he was appointed by God.
Mm-hmm.
So when they ended up being a king or not, they still showed that respect to God.
Yes. And remember, the men of Jabesh Gilead are the ones who sent for help at the beginning when the Ammonites came up against him and said, they said, we'll come out to you. He said, okay, but I get to pluck out your right eye. Well, not so fast. We need some help. So they sent for Saul. Saul attacked. Saul delivered the city. That's why Jabesh Gilead, the men here particularly, they have this emotional attachment to Saul as a king, as somebody who had rescued them. In spite of everything that had happened in between, they go, they get the bodies. They give them a decent burial, if you will. Any other thoughts there? So what do you think about the end of Saul's life? The way that it ended.
Well, it's tragic. That is the way that his life ended. Because, as you know, he was blessed, he was prosperous, in leading the people and all the things that he did, but he failed to recognize what do we have that God had given us.
Yeah. He could have had such a, and I don't mean this in an untoward way, but he could have had a glorious life. He could have gone down in history as one of the greatest men ever, and he goes down as just absolutely terrible man in a shameful way, taking his own life at the end because of that situation, wounded in battle. And it's such a shame that he ended up like that. But it's because of a series of choices that he made along the way and the attitude that he took about his position, about decisions he made that he didn't like how God responded to those decisions. And so he ended up like that. He's a great cautionary tale. And I have to say that if somebody would actually take this and, people write scripts in Hollywood and all that for various things, fictional things that they make up. And then sometimes they try to take the Bible story and they always mess it up. But if they just actually took this is a story. This is a tragedy. This is real life and real lessons that we can learn out of these men and women in the past, Saul in particular here, and how we ought to have an attitude of dedication, a loyalty to God to avoid these problems. Ron.
Stephen, as you have talked previously about leadership, Saul was a leader, but we see the things that can become susceptible to leaders. He's a man of God, but we can also contrast that to leaders that become susceptible to this who are not men of God. And we see the demise that comes upon them and the suffering that comes upon the people of whom they are responsible to lead.
Yes, exactly right. You see that in Saul's life, that being a leader, he turns against his family, Jonathan. He turns against the priest of God. He turns against the anointed of God. He's just completely antagonistic to everything around him that he ought to be in harmony with. So, Lord willing, next week, let's go on to David, and it's still that same lesson in the workbook, but let's go on to David, and we'll spend some time going through his life.